for a strong dose of love, joy, laughter, and information for healthy living.
Well, we're living in our purpose because God put us on this earth. Our purpose on this earth was to encourage each other. I often wonder why there are so many people, but that is the way God operates. We are an encouragement to some people who are discouraged from feeling that they can succeed. And success only comes by failure. A certain amount of failures leads to success. The attitude is, I am not going to quit. I'm going to stick it out until the end.
Welcome to Arise. This is LaTanya Smiley, and today I have with me Dr. Sharaka Melton, Dr. Deborah Cooley, and Eddie Walker. Thank you all for coming on the show. There have been a lot of discussions about school reopening, and we want to just some concerns before and just kind of be open about what's really going on. And so here we are. This is a moment in education that we never thought would ever occur. Okay. So let's discuss the concerns as relate to reopening. What are your concerns, Dr.?
Let me just say this, that I wanted to thank Ms. Smiley for bringing us three together to have this engaging conversation. I want it to be known that we are not only educators, but we are ministers of the gospel. So we are looking at this from different perspectives. When we're talking to our congregants and we're talking to other ministers and elders and preachers and Pastor Eddie is a pastor. And when we're talking to our HBCU alumni and we're talking to other educators and community and family, the biggest concern is the health issues, the underlying health issues that many of our colleagues experience. And not only our colleagues, but also those that work in the buildings, the cafeteria workers, the custodians, and then the children. So that is one of the things that I've been talking with many of my friends, and not only in Georgia, but around the country, who are expressing concerns about what happens after COVID. Once you get it, what happens to me? What happens to my family? I can't no longer think about myself anymore. I have to think about the people that I live in the house with. And many of us have been in bubbles for a while. I mean, bubbles, haven't seen our friends. And we were just talking about this a minute ago. So that's the major is the health concern and what's going to happen to our families and significant others and all of those that we come in contact with along the way.
Minister Walker.
Yes, ma'am. You know, and again, I like
as Minister Walker. How do you want me to refer?
You know, you can refer to me as Eddie. I'm cool with Eddie. I'm cool with it. Yeah, you can say Eddie. I don't get caught up in the title at all. So, but you know, I wanted to thank you, Ms. Smiley, for this opportunity to be able to be a part of this podcast, and Dr. Cooley and Dr. Shelton. I'm looking forward to hearing your input and being a part of what you are sharing. As mentioned, as Dr. Cooley mentioned, as being an educator as well as being a pastor, I hear this different things, but the same thing. I hear, for example, as a pastor, I've had 3 people who have been contracted with COVID. Now, one of the young ladies, one of my members is a grandmother, and she contracted it from her grandchildren, who are school age. They were asymptomatic, but once she contracted it, you know, it pretty much did a number on her. But fortunately, she's okay right now. So that kind of put me in the frame of mind of what happens when our children come back into the school building and are exposed and are asymptomatic and not showing any signs, but are around people who are vulnerable, who are showing signs. Those are some of the questions that we really don't hear answered, or scenarios that we don't really hear discussed, because it's real. It's definitely real. Those things are actually occurring. Those things are occurring. And some of the opportunities or scenarios that that are being shared, I wonder about the practicality behind it. how effective is it going to be in that regards? And so, you know, when we're looking at that and when we're looking at how it impacts our children and how it impacts the adults or just everyone involved, I don't think we're looking at it truly on how it, I guess for lack of a better word, may not be our best options for our community. When you're looking at things like liability and contact tracing, and some of the notes that I was taking last night, like healthcare insurance, our families who may or may not have healthcare insurance, and how are they receiving the healthcare? You know, we've recently seen a situation where an individual received top of the line healthcare and claiming that they're cured versus families that are not receiving quality health care. You're looking at that disparity. You're looking at the disparity in the communities and the schools in which we serve. So a lot of those things that come to mind based off of my experience as an educator and based off of my experience as a pastor and some of the things that they come to me and that they share with me. I lost my grandmother as a result of COVID. So it definitely comes home to me to understand, you know, what that impact is like and to be sensitive to know, you know, my grandmother was one of the 212,000. So, you know, all that plays a factor and all those scenarios come into play. So again, you know, Ms. Smiley, I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations because maybe I can receive or be able to receive some sense of healing in this space right now.
I personally I'm a diabetic, so it is a large, huge concern for me going back into the building, you know, being in those high risk groups of contracting this virus. And also I've had 2 uncles within the past month to pass away of COVID and a dear friend, all under the age of 60, one as young as 38. So it has personally impacted me severely. I've been going to funerals. My brother's mom also passed away of the coronavirus. So it has really been hitting my family personally. And I am very concerned. I have a 10-year-old son, and I'm trying to think about, you know, if something were to break out at the school, you know, how would I try to handle keeping my home safe from, you know, him also being in a category as well. It is absolutely, just to be totally honest, it is so scary. But coming from the side of knowing that God is able, we have to really, really pray, and we have to pray for healing for our land because it is getting bad all over the world. It is bad.
Well, the school districts are following guidelines through phases. You have the phase that most districts are in now across the nation. They're doing 100% virtual. So we know what that means. And then the next phase for most districts is to move into the hybrid. And that's where the confusion comes in, because you have those who are actually in the trenches of the hybrid, and we're hearing different concerns and issues centered around that. Give us a description of exactly what is hybrid. How does that look, Dr. Cooley?
Okay. My definition of hybrid is not what is being said publicly and what's not happening. I came into the online learning situation back in 2004. And as I went through my doctoral program, we had hybrid. Hybrid is known as you're online for a certain amount of time. Your whole cohort, we're together online, preparing academically, whatever the lessons or assignments. Then we transition to the campus for either a few days, a weekend, or whatever. And that was my definition of hybrid. Once you left that class for the weekend or whatever time you were there, then you would transition back to complete all of your assignments and assessments or whatever. What I'm hearing hybrid is now, and I've been talking to friends who are in different other school districts in the metro area, I have been told that so many students are in the classroom while the teacher is up on Zoom teaching simultaneously as the students that elected to stay home are there virtually, and the students that elected to come to school are in the classroom. The navigation, from what I understand, is very difficult because you have students that are online that you need to monitor, you need to talk to. Once you give a piece of information, for example, we're talking about synchronous and asynchronous learning. We know synchronous learning is direct instruction. So once you do the direct instruction and you move to asynchronous, the asynchronous part of that day before the closing, what happens to the children that are on virtual Zoom, and what happens to the children in the classroom? What does that look like? How do you navigate as a teacher with this way of talking about hybrid? And for what I understand, we're losing students even more now because the teacher is not able to navigate between the in-house and the ones that are on Zoom at the same time. Students are not. Go ahead.
So one second. So basically what I'm hearing is that teachers are being placed in that format without any guidelines, without any procedures that are in place.
Right. From what I understand, there was not a definite training or protocol, training of how do you walk teachers through this process, because virtual is an element all of its own. Navigating from the synchronous direct instruction to the asynchronous, which is really the work period, and then navigating back to the closing, which is synchronous. How do you navigate that when you have so many students in a classroom that elect to come to school and sit in the classroom? So do you leave the Zoom and you run over to group A? So how do you do the groupings? For example, in virtual, when we go to asynchronous, we can have breakout rooms. Some districts that just have Zoom only, you can't go to breakout rooms. So what do? How do you navigate? How do you meet the needs of your exceptional ed? How do you meet the needs of your regular ed? What do you do there? So there are a lot of variables and moving pieces. Yes, it is doable, but we must have a plan and we must train our teachers on how to do it effectively. And what I understand now, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear.
No, it's okay. You brought up a good question, which leads me to the next one about students with special needs. Dr. Melton, how is this affecting the learning styles of the special needs students? How do you feel like this is really affecting them now or in the future?
We have such a broad population of students that have so many, you have some with specific learning disabilities, some with emotional. It is just a broad spectrum of things that we have to address. And the entire virtual process of it all almost takes away your ability to confidently impact those students with special needs. It is very distant. Many of them are having difficulty being able to, just sit still and follow lessons from a screen. That's a part of, some of them have to have that movement, and you have to be creative in ways in which you can virtually get them up and moving. It is an extreme task. And not only that, some of our students that have some severe illnesses that they need special physical help with certain things. I'm just worried about how does that look going back with the hybrid model. You're having students that may need some physical assistance, if you will, and I'm not sure if all of the powers that be have really took the time to say, how can we effectively teach all students and make sure that they have an appropriate education that will allow them to flourish? And I just think that before we rush into going back or into staying, whatever the case may be, we definitely need some guidance, some trainings, and more information to know that we can meet the needs of all students. And I know personally, you know, as being an exceptional educator for 16 years, these babies, I call all my babies, they're struggling. Many of them are struggling with this virtual world, with not being able to connect. You know, we only want to educate the child academically. Well, you'll never win that way. You have to educate the child in its whole totality of everything, the social, the emotional. You have to, it's not just about academics. It's not just about passing math tests. It's not just about passing Georgia milestones. You want this great results in passing these tests, you got to create some space to be able to treat the entire child, to be able to educate the entire child. And I think those, I think that is what we're missing. And I think that's gonna be a big challenge for all of those that are making these decisions.
Well, I can really attest to the social emotional part because I strongly feel that the system has not thoroughly thought about some type of setup for those social emotional areas to be addressed efficiently through the counselors and through the social worker departments. I just feel like we doing the best that we can in those areas, but I do believe that it could be more efficient in those areas, in reaching the areas of social emotional learning.
And I wanted to add in, Ms. Smiley, in regards to the exceptional ed, because I'm an exceptional education teacher as well. The county has recommended that we do what's called a digital learning plan. And when we were constructing the digital learning plan, there were so many parts of it that, for example, those who have BIPs, behavior intervention plans. How do we monitor the behavior? How do we monitor the emotional issues that we see in the school? And how do we train or educate our parents in order to be able to help us maintain documentation and data in regards to the progression and how the student is actually progressing? And one of the things that I learned is that the parents are challenged technologically as well as how to implement what is within that plan. So when we were creating the digital learning plan, we realistically had to say, okay, we really can't monitor the behavior, because we're not with them those 8 hours. We really can't see how they're doing in this area because we're not with them in this area. We can't really give true data to show that they're making progress and or not. So the student not only academically is falling behind, but they're also on the behavior and emotional piece falling behind, because that we really can't capture or use those interventions that we said that we were going to use prior to being released from COVID. And so that creates an issue within itself. And then we see the part of the parents trying to help their kid who knows that they have this plan, and they're realizing that they're limited in their awareness alone on managing the behavior or implementing the intervention, not mentioning the academic piece, especially when you get to, that higher level of 4th grade. The average person can probably only do, 3rd or 4th grade math, because, that is a whole different meaning than what we were trained to. So now they're becoming a student as well and trying to grasp it and trying to help their child, and it limits them. It limits them on many levels. So I think, as the doctor mentioned earlier, that our babies, our children, we have to teach them holistically, but now we're in this virtual realm. We really can't do that. And I think that emotionally plays on us. because we see the impact, we see what it's doing, we see how it's trying them, and then we hear their concerns. But on the flip side, you're looking like, okay, this is uncomfortable. However, on many levels, this is a life or death situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a life or death situation. We can't say, okay, well, this is uncomfortable, so let's go back in, because we're dealing with an issue or a virus that is constantly evolving. We're finding out more, or we're learning, and then we're unlearning, and then like, oh, wait a minute, this works. Wait, we thought it did. You know, we're going back and forth, and we're seeing numbers rise. And the reality is, at the end of the day, we don't want to be one of the numbers. We don't want to deal with on our consciousness to say, out of 212, I was a part of one of those, and it could have been prevented.
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
And that's, so we have and that's the key. The key thing is prevention.
Yeah. How do we prevent that from happening?
Yeah.
And I think when, you know, as Dr. Cooley was saying, we have to be willing to learn how to teach people, not only teachers, but our parents, how to do this, and understand that it's deeper than you being uncomfortable. Right. Yes, it is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. However, it's necessary. We don't want this to happen. We already know we have people who have preconditioned illnesses. We already know. And
the numbers are increasing. I'm not sure what numbers they're looking at, but the numbers are increasing.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, exactly. That was the question. Where are you getting your numbers from?
Yeah,
right.
You know, like, okay, well, where's this coming
here in Georgia?
Yeah, especially in Georgia, you know, and like I said, I can go on and on, but it's like we definitely need to work on. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but we definitely need to work on strategies and programs and tutorials and developments that will teach us how to deal with this in this moment. Because I promise you, the other end, if you think this is hard, the other end is much harder, and it's a much deeper price that you have to pay.
And I think you made a good point there, and you said in this moment. And I think right now we really need to focus on this moment and how to develop in this moment, because this moment is very critical. How we deal with this moment has a lot to do how we end up, you know, in the future, which is very critical. It's very critical.
Can I
want to say
just one point? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was asking, okay. Just to add, in this moment, as we just finished talking, we also have to make sure that we give ourselves the patience instead of rushing back into these processes. I think that many people that are in leadership or making the decisions, it is very important, extremely important, that they're not rushing any decision making based on trying to meet some standards of whoever it is that are making these decisions, because I know sometimes when we speed back into things is when we see the most errors in how we're trying to develop, going back in, staying out, whatever the case may be. I think we need to have the data, the patience, and the training.
Right. And also just to really, I want us to really think about this. This is a moment that we are now officially leveling the playing field. I want you to think about that for a minute. Now, we've been in the virtual, really, we've been moving towards this the last 10 years in the district. However, our teachers, our children, our parents, they were not moving in that direction when other students and parents in the private sector, in other districts around the country, were already doing virtual with fidelity. African-American students were nowhere near that. Think about it. Think about it. So now this is a time that the playing field as far as education is being leveled.
Yes.
And now we're all at the place called, let's all do this now. Instead of Johnny, who's in the school district with millions of dollars. Now you have it in our communities, some that have been impacted economically, now know how to navigate virtually. Before then, they didn't touch it. So let's think about it in that perspective, that when it's all said and done, like one of my pastors would say, when it all boils down, we're all are going to be on the same page. I know how to navigate virtually. I know how to do my assignments. I know how to upload. I know how to follow all the protocols in doing virtual. So it's no more you have it better than I have it. We're on the same page as educators and as students. Now we can say, ready, set, let us all go.
Let's talk about what measures should be in place for reopening to make people feel secure about coming in. What for students to you know, for the whole transition, so there'll be a smooth transition. What needs to be in place? Dr. Cooley. I'm sorry, Dr. Melton. Dr. Melton.
There are a couple of variables that come. There are a couple of variables that come to mind when I think about, you know, as smooth as we possibly can get. Temperature checks. Temperature checks immediately when students come in, when adults come in, when parents come in, or who's coming in the building should be subjected to a temperature check. Masks, all of the sanitizing, cleaning, after each use, high cleaning of the building, making sure that after each use of, you know, the doors, making sure we're wiping down the desk. You know, I just think that we need to be very proactive in making sure that we are not allowing students in that have, you know, high temperatures, or parents or adults. I just think that we need to have a plan in place. Where we're going to house these individuals if they get dropped off by the bus. You know, what's the protocol? What's the plan of making sure that we have an area for these students, that we can set them aside until we can get them some relief of someone coming to get them, or get them some type of medical attention, or not just students. I'm saying students because they are a high population, but I'm talking about everybody. So I just think if I had to just hone in on a couple, it would be temperature check, mask, and cleanliness.
Eddie.
You know, and I definitely agree with everything that you mentioned. Definitely the temperature check, definitely the cleanliness, and definitely the mask. But you know, as you were mentioning that, and as I've been thinking about it, one of the questions that I would ask myself is that if a child is sick, or a child is telling their parent that they're sick, but the parent brings that child anyway. What do we put into place in that? Do we isolate that child based off of what they're saying, that they don't feel well? And even if it reads that the temperature may be high, do we still isolate them? And then who sits with them once they're isolated? And to what extent does that happen? And you know, and it kind of creates an overall domino effect. But go back to what your question was. Definitely the procedures that we use as far as the mask, the temperature check, and the cleanliness, and making sure things are clean and in place. But you know, the question comes to my mind: if it does not, then what?
Right.
Exactly.
You know, literally, if it does not, then what? Like for the district, they have given us a list of the do's and don'ts before we open the church back up. And we have to check off for each one of those. And in the event, and it boils down to the issue of liability. You know, how do we hold liable? How do we do contact tracing? Once we put these things into place and we do to our own due diligence, if the child does come back positive, who's held liable?
Right.
And so, you know, go ahead.
Go ahead, finish.
Okay, and so, and that's, you know, that's what, you know, the district is telling us. We have to check off on it and say that we've done all these things, so we won't hold the district to be liable in the denomination. And therefore the liability will fall back possibly on us or that individual. So there's, you know, even though if we put those things into place and we do those measures, what does it remove us from liability? And if the
Right.
child does have a high fever and we isolate them, where do we take the child and who watches them? Who's going to volunteer to do that?
Right. I believe that transparency plays a very major part in all of this, and that is the truth, and that is, you know, are the buildings up to par, and you know, are you really doing what you need to do to make sure that when educators and students enter into those buildings, into that environment, that they are truly safe. Dr. Cooley.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm looking at consistency and fidelity. And what I'm hearing from those that are in other districts around the metro area, yes, the schools start off good wearing masks, but as time goes on, the masks are off, the employees are lax, and many are getting ill, and it is not being reported. So what's the protocol for that? As Pastor Eddie said, as Dr. Chirac said, what's the protocol? Consistency with the mask. Do we have enough money to provide a mask for every child every day?
Right.
Do we have sanitizing stations throughout the building? Are the restrooms cleaned periodically, consistently? Are we socially distancing? We haven't talked about that yet. In the classroom, we can no longer have 35, 38 students in a classroom. We cannot open the windows. What about the air filtration system? How often will that be cleaned? So we have to look at some serious issues. But if we're going to have the check off, like Pastor Eddie said, yes, my denomination, the same thing. When the presiding bishop in California said, okay, this is a checklist. You do not do this because you're liable. If you open up that church and you look at this checklist and you're not following or adhering to it, then that will be a libelous situation.
Yes, ma'am.
And you will be responsible. So now we've got to come up with some protocols. But we've got to be consistent. We can't get back in the building and say, oh, leave them alone. They don't have to wear a mask. Guys, you know, there are going to be kids say, I'm not putting on a mask, and you're not going to make me. So what do we do? What do we do? So we've got to know things before we go back into a building.
And you know, we have to really look at that. You're saying we're going back in the building for 8 hours out the day. It's not like church where we can say, okay, we're going to go outside for 30 minutes. Everybody 6 feet apart, put on your mask. You sit in your car for service. You're 8 hours out the day with 30 plus kids in a room within a certain measurement. Then you're going back out with other kids, you know, going to lunch, going to specials, going for whatever reason you have going on. And you're in that space for 8 hours.
Yes.
And you're asking the question of, okay, did we do well today? What's tomorrow going to look like? Okay, such and such cough. Let's see what that's all about, you know. And so we have to look at it from that standpoint. But now we're taking on, as you know, was mentioned, as Dr. Cooley was mentioning, and as what was told to us as the denomination, you're looking at the liability issue. Now, you know as well as I do, there is not any precedent or any court case. So there's the legal aspect of it. There's not a court case that shows precedence of saying this is the standard of liability in relationship to COVID.
Right. But this is really has been very enlightening, and those who are listening and watching this show, hopefully this could be something that will provoke other conversations and start to allow people to really think, and the powers that be, like you said, Dr. Melton, allow them to really go back and truly evaluate the system, truly evaluate what we're working with, and come up with something that works for everyone and that is safe for everyone involved, and that's beneficial for everyone involved. And again, my main concern is transparency. And when you are delivering information, make sure it's the truth. Make sure you're delivering information wherein parents can really truly see what they are placing their children, what they're pushing their children, turning their children's back to. We really need to know that. And I really want to thank everyone for coming out. You're awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
You're awesome. And we might just have to revisit this afterwards. We are going to have to revisit this. I'm
Definitely.
sooner than later. I'm more positive of that. So again, thank you all for coming to Rise Show.
Thank
you.
No problem. Had a good time. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smiley, for the opportunity to speak as educators and on behalf of our families and friends and community, because we do represent all those areas and much more. So we thank you for the public service.
Thank you so much. Some amazing guests today as well.
It was.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you.
Me too. Me too. We gonna take this on
All
the road.
right, guys.
You have been listening to Arise.